we go. It's right at the top. All right, there we go. Well, we'll jump right in if Athena and Sven, you all are feeling ready. Really excited to be here with you all today. Happy World Oceans Day. I feel like maybe we don't celebrate that enough. So I was really, really excited to host this webinar and chat with folks from Fair Trade USA, as well as Aquaculture Stewardship Council about fair trade seafood for the first time. At least in my time at Fair Trade USA, we haven't hosted a call like this before. So super, super excited. And thank you all for spending some time with us as we chat about fair trade and sustainable seafood. My name is Taryn Lemon, and I work for Fair Trade USA as the Fair Trade Campaigns and Communications Coordinator. And I'm excited to be here with Athena Davis from Aquaculture Stewardship Council, as well as Sven Blankenhorn from Fair Trade USA. So to get us started, we have Athena Davis is going to speak first from Aquaculture Stewardship Council, or ASC. So Athena is currently responsible for overseeing ASC's outreach into the North American market through the global organization's largest marketing campaign to date. She brings over a decade of nonprofit experience in the animal welfare and human resources sectors, together with a passion for food marketing and sustainability, all drawn from her time in agriculture and the food and beverage industry. Athena believes in aquaculture, also known as seafood farming, offers incredible benefits to shoppers and diners around the country in the form of a high protein, low carbon footprint, delicious and nutritious food source. Her goal is to help seafood lovers and even those who are new to seafood feel more connected to their plates by understanding the meaning and value behind ASC's certification and label for responsibly raised seafood. So with that, she's going to dive into all of those things a little bit more and give us a background of AFC, and I will let you take it away.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Taryn, for the intro. And I am going to see if I can share my screen with you. Share my presentation. Let's see, we'll get this. Can you see this okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you everybody who joined us today on World Ocean Day. Again, we're very excited. It's a great day. And I think a lot of people maybe think about farm seafood and don't think about the ocean, but they're very, very related in many ways. And so I wanted to give first, and forgive me if there are those of you on the call who are very, very familiar with aquaculture, but I know there may be many people who are not. And so I wanted to kind of give a start on what that is, like why it's important to us before I really dive into what we as ASC do. So in terms of what aquaculture is really a fancy word for seafood farming. So it's similar to agriculture. It's a form of farming done in water by raising fish, crustaceans, shellfish, algae, seaweed, and is actually not a new thing at all, although it is seeing rapid growth over the last many, many decades. So we look back and can see aquaculture done throughout centuries in many places around the world, all sorts of different practices, some of which are still used today. And in fact, there are a lot of similarities, and I say this as someone who also has a background in agriculture, between terrestrial farming on land and aquaculture in the ocean.
It's the last of the chicken of that chicken.
Somebody
Yeah,
is not muted. Sorry, it's okay. Thank you so much. And I think many people may or may not be aware also that fish farming or seafood farming actually has a much lower carbon footprint than other forms of protein farming. So I wanted to show a little bit of aquaculture in action. So these are all ASC certified farms from around the world. So this is one of many ways aquaculture can look today. We've got shrimp, we have Hawaiian kampachi, we have tilapia, oysters, salmon, mussels, and many, many other species that can be farmed as well as certified under ASC's program. So these are just a few examples to kind of give you set the scene, give you the faces behind aquaculture. And I love showing people pictures of seafood farms because a lot of times they're not what you have in mind. So in terms of why aquaculture matters to us and to everyone really, there's a couple of things here. So I have a couple of important points, but on the right, I think I'll just show you first. This is from the FAO, and what it demonstrates, if you look at the blue line, is the growth in aquaculture. that we are seeing. This is up to 2020, and this number has not gone down, FYI. And then we're also seeing kind of a decrease in orange in global capture. So that would be fishing. And we obviously have a huge growth in population, and we don't see this slowing down at all. And there's a number I'll give you in a later slide, but I do like to tell people up front that over half of the seafood we eat in the United States is farmed, and that number is not slowing down at all. So again, this is just to show how fast we're growing as a planet and how fast the sector is growing and has been growing. And it really does play a crucial role in providing healthy, affordable protein to people around the world. And we want to try to, through ASC, to continue to make that done in a responsible way. Aquaculture can also provide a really important solution to support and help restore overfished wild populations. So we like to see it as a balance. It's not one or the other. It's not farmed or wild, but it's about sourcing correctly, shopping responsibly, and making sure that you are finding seafood that's been processed the right way. And then, of course, super important, global livelihood. There was an estimated 8.5 million people employed in primary fisheries and aquaculture sectors in 2020. That number has not really gone down as well. And we see it with aquaculture kind of, again, on the map on the right-hand side, outshining traditional fishing that is continuing to grow. And it really is not just a farm here and there. There are entire communities that are sustained by aquaculture, by farming, and also by the protein that it provides. So it's really important to take those into consideration as we talk about farm seafood. So again, it does produce over half of all the seafood we eat worldwide, and it provides a great opportunity to help fight world hunger, malnutrition, overfishing. But we cannot ignore the elephant in the room, right? As with all farming, it can have negative social and environmental impacts if it's not done in a responsible manner. And that's really why we're here. So due to the quickness with which aquaculture has developed, due to some truly bad practices in the past, and certainly some today as well, seafood farming does historically have an association with poor site management. People often think about dirty water, ruining local ecosystems, unhealthy fish, poor working conditions. The good news I'm here to share is that the industry has come a really long way. So we have seen that fish farming can be done responsibly. We've seen really positive results. There is a lot of cleanup that's been done in the industry. There's a lot of innovation, a lot of technology that is guiding many responsible farms towards more improved production, improved positive impacts on the environment, improved impacts on communities and employees. And so that's the really great news, but there is still work to be done. We are not there yet. We are not fully sustainable in the seafood world or really anywhere. And so that is where ASC comes in. So we are a global nonprofit. We're leading the world's strictest standards for responsible aquaculture through our certification and labeling program. So we offer a set of standards and requirements that farms and other companies in the supply chain can go through to get certified. And we operate a third-party certification. So they are done by independent audits to make this as fair as possible. And that's how companies are able to become certified. And we're really based in a mission to transform aquaculture towards greater environmental sustainability and social responsibility. But we want to do that in the market, using that to create value across the chain. So it's, starts at the farm, but it really ends with us, those of us who are cooking with and eating seafood and sourcing seafood to sell. So for us, just a little tiny background, ASC was founded in 2010 through partnership with the Dutch Trade Initiative and WWF to make aquaculture more sustainable. And again, we do this by setting strict standards for seafood farms and also then delivering high assurance. So increased traceability, increased transparency throughout the supply chain through a number of things that we do. And then just as an aside, but I think a very important one, we were connected through the certification reigns collaboration with Fair Trade. So ASC and Fair Trade actually signed an MOU in 2019 to work more closely together, particularly when it comes to social issues in aquaculture. So we've had a lot of exciting things and a lot of exciting partnerships and alignment there. And so really thrilled again to be a part of this and kind of connect all of the dots here today when it comes to seafood farming. When you might be wondering, some of you, what the ASC standards actually are. So it's not like a set of 5 standards. There are hundreds of requirements to mitigate negative impacts that can result from seafood farming operations. So we want to promote biodiversity, conservation, foster resilient livelihoods. And so that's really what these requirements are geared towards. So each standard contains many different requirements. Each standard belongs to a different species. So there are a lot of factors to take into account, also depending on what type of farming method is being used and where it is located in the world. So certified farms must follow these standards, and this is just a small example of some of those things. So it could be fair treatment and pay for workers on the farm, no child labor, engaging with local farming communities, and really taking the temperature of how this is benefiting or harming them, water quality testing, benthic floor testing, fish health, and monitoring local biodiversity. And even beyond the standards, ASC, as well as some of the farms we work with, do have beyond certification other activities they take part of that can include things like habitat restoration to further offset what could potentially be negative impacts and actually bring some positivity to those communities and those farming operations. So to step back a bit, big picture, since we've been operating since 2010, our impacts here are that we have 13 global standards for responsible seafood and feed production with over 2,000 ASC certified farm sites around the world. And we work, I should mention, with very large farms and very small farms. So there is no one who cannot be included if they're interested in operating more sustainably and changing their operations or submitting certification, wanting to work to get to that point. There are over 50 species produced to meet the ASC standards. So we know a lot of the common ones like salmon, like shrimp, but there are many, many, many different species around the world that are certified. And we have almost 30,000 labeled products in supermarket shelves globally. And I will get into what the label means a little bit more in a minute here. And then one that obviously the statistic on the top right can tell you kind of the sheer amount of ASC certified seafood that's produced around the world, with seafood available in almost 100 countries around the world for people to purchase. So that's really exciting. ASC was an organization that started in Europe. So as was mentioned, I'm responsible for outreach in North America, and we're really thrilled to be able to be building awareness here. So you won't necessarily go to the store and see as many labels right now as you might if you were to go to a store in Amsterdam, because they have been working with ASC for a very long time, but we're seeing a huge increase here in understanding of what it means to source responsibly. And so that's really why we're here talking with you today, and love to hear questions, comments, where you can find seafood and all sorts of things like that. So just to dive in a little bit more to the social requirements, again, there are many, many, many requirements. So I'm going to just give a broad overview, but our standards really do place social issues at the heart of what it means to be a responsible producer. So we do have those independent auditors. We actually have specially trained auditors for social issues, which is really important. And there are certain standards. So for example, our shrimp standard, where there are often in shrimp farming higher instances potentially of human rights abuses. We have special attention put into those areas, and we have auditors visit farms during harvest, during times when those things would be most likely to happen. So we really try to make sure we can see a true picture of what's going on there and what these operations are like. And so these types of requirements can include fair pay, obviously. So there is a requirement for basic needs, decent wages, and or making the improvements necessary towards achieving that. So there has to be really that standard there. Community engagement, again, is huge and I think really important. So it's critical of being a good neighbor. We do ask farms take the temperature of their communities, talk to people in their communities. Auditors may go out and also talk to people in those communities and ask how the relationship is going, if there could be improvements. So that's an important part of being a good neighbor, being a responsible producer. And then, as mentioned, with shrimp being a particularly difficult issue when it comes to human rights, there are actually impact assessments that are done on ASC side to identify potential negative impact areas like in communities and other affected groups. There are a lot of different ways we approach social. And just in 2022, we had 720 improvements to drive social responsibility. So this can give you kind of an idea of the types of outcomes that come from that. It's not just you pass, you fail. There also are opportunities to improve farm operations so that more people are getting the care, the respect, and the type of payment and benefits that they deserve. And I wanted to just kind of show this visual for environmental requirements. Again, there are many of these, and these are also very dependent on the species, but there are a lot of things that track all the way through all of the standards, and just kind of looking at all of these potential areas that can be affected. And this is clearly a very simplified version. It does show you that there are attention to things like escapes or, exposure from like wild populations to farm populations, protection of wildlife, minimizing impacts on seabed, constantly monitoring of water quality, monitoring fish health as well. Again, protecting and restoring oftentimes areas that would be critical habitats. And so this to just give you kind of a picture of what can go into a single farm operation in the most basic sense of the word. But we really are very keen on ensuring that our oceans and sea floors and some even land-based operations are following the best environmental practices. And there are many, many, many fish farms that do happen right in the ocean. And I think that's something a lot of people may not be aware of. So just a quick summary on improvements on ASC certified farms, and this is just for 2022. We had 145 improvements in farmer well-being, 76 improvements in fair and transparent working conditions, 454 improvements in fish health, 213 improvements in biodiversity, 205 feed and resource use improvements. We've also introduced a new feed standard that actually requires that feed mills and feed mill ingredient producers are sourcing responsibly and using responsible sources that then get delivered. So it really goes down to the core of the issue. We had 229 improvements in impacts to the seafloor, 160 improvements in water quality, and 234 improvements in health and safety. So just to give you a small summary of the types of things that can be pushed forward into a really positive direction in the world of aquaculture. And beyond that, we do also have a chain of custody standard. So what this does is actually each company throughout the supply chain is eligible to also be audited against our chain of custody to ensure that they are properly handling certified seafood, that we know the seafood they're getting is the seafood that was told they were getting. So it's basically, and when it really comes down to it, it's basically about transparency. So it's from the farm to the fork, and that way you can assure whether it was at the processor, whether it's at the distributor, whether it's at the retail store, whether it's at the restaurant, if it bears the ASC label, that's really the best way to know that it was tracked throughout the supply chain and that you are getting the seafood that you are told you are getting and that it was raised on a responsible farm. Something important to point out in the seafood industry in general, but also it can be very prevalent in the farmed seafood industry, is that there are a lot of practices that can include swapping out seafood. So selling seafood from saying it's from one country when it isn't. Many of us are probably familiar with the Subway tuna debacle of many years ago, but claiming a certain fish is something that it actually isn't. And there are just a lot of other issues that can happen behind the scenes when we aren't running a clean traceability channel and companies aren't sourcing responsibly and really following these rules. So they seem very strict, and they are, but that is for a reason. And it's because we want to have integrity throughout the supply chain. We have these farms who put in all of this work and all of this effort to do the best they possibly can do to be responsible producers. And so this ensures that that carries all the way through to the shopper, to the customer, to the diner. And we think that's a really, really important part of the process. And it also allows other companies to take part in the process and to make those responsible decisions. So when it comes back really down to it, what you can do is look for the label when you're shopping for seafood in your grocery store. So there's a real package with the label on it. I like to tell people the label is not a marketing symbol. I think fair trade can relate to this as well. There is a lot that goes behind that label. There's a lot that you know now what that label means, and this label cannot be on a product that has not met all of those requirements. So it's really an assurance tool, and it lets people know and recognize when they see the product that they can count on that and feel like they're being responsible. And when it comes down to it, it really is an easy choice. So it's something simple we can do in a very complicated world. I always say seafood is complex, but your shopping shouldn't have to be. If you don't see it, ask for it. So, if you don't see certified seafood at your fish counter in restaurants or you're eating out and you want to know, it's great to ask. Sometimes people can check for you. Sometimes they may not know. Sometimes they'll ask and they'll look into it and say, hey, we should be doing this. So the more we can draw attention to it, the better. ASC also is a sister organization of the Marine Stewardship Council, which has a similar program to ours. It is a different organization, but they operate with sustainable wild caught seafood. And so we work very closely with them. Again, our goal is to help people learn about what this means and to really find a balance. It's not really anymore about wild or farmed. Is one bad, is the other good? It's about finding the right balance, making sure we're doing this responsibly and sustainably, and just really making sure that we are all working together to communicate and to help move the industry forward. And of course, I always like to plug to please aim to try to eat seafood 2 times a week. It is what is recommended by dietitians, and it's a great way to get really high protein into your diet. It's such a healthy way to eat, and there are just so many wonderful species out there that are ASC certified and that you can find in your grocery stores, and we're seeing more and more every day. So we do also love to see you support companies that source responsibly. So there are a lot of retailers that do source ASC certified seafood. I put a few up here that you may recognize. You'll see package labeled products when you go into these stores. On the right-hand side, again, there's another example of products showing the label. We have tinned seafood products, we have smoked salmon products. All of those things are out there, and we're thrilled to be seeing that increase around the country. And that's kind of the gist. It's always a full circle, you know, it starts at the farm, but it ends with us. And so we like to put that responsibility on all of us to come together as a community. And I'm really proud to be a partner of Fair Trade, to be working with you on this important work that we're doing, you know, in aquaculture and in the environment and for people around the world. So I thank you all so much for listening to kind of the background of ASC. I look forward to any questions you might have about what we do. And I encourage you to follow us on our website, on social media. We are always posting information about aquaculture. We like to do a lot of farm spotlights and features, so you can actually see the faces behind the people raising your seafood. And yeah, thank you. Happy World Oceans Day, everybody. And Jennifer, I see you have a question already.
No, I was just applauding you. Good job, Athena. Thank you so much for everything.
Well, I really truly appreciate you know, joining everybody today. And aquaculture is something I think should all be talking about more and more aware of. And so any opportunity to be able to do that is fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much, Athena. That was so interesting. I saw a couple of people in the chat too saying I don't really know anything about aquaculture or really seafood in general, seafood farming or captures. But it was so interesting. All of these trigger words that you said, like third-party audits and standards, impact, transparency, decent wages, all of these things makes it so obvious as to why ASC and Fair Trade USA, Fair Trade Certified, do have a partnership. So that was just really exciting for me to hear all those words and really make that connection. So thank you so much, Athena. I'm
My
going
pleasure,
to,
absolutely.
yeah, we're going to move on now to Sven. I'm going to replace the spotlight here, and I'll give a little bit of his biography, and then he can take it away with his presentation. So Sven holds a PhD in biology, specializing in the intersection of traditional fishing, seaweed farming, and their socio-ecological balance. He's been living in Indonesia for more than 20 years. Sven has extensive experience in developing alternative aquaculture-based business models for Indonesian small island communities, as well as in operationalizing industrial-scale marine culture in remote Malaysia. Sven joined the Fair Trade USA seafood team in 2015, and as the seafood advisor for Asia, he is working with fisher and farmer communities, as well as with seafood processors throughout the region. Implementing current best practices in human and workers' rights, traceability, and environmental stewardship into successful businesses, and ultimately creating mutual benefits for all partners along the value chain is very rewarding for Sven. And I will let you take it away.
Thank you, Taryn, for the kind introduction, and thank you, Athena, for your excellent introduction to the ASC program. You guys have mentioned it before. There's certainly some similarities with Fair Trade USA. So why not just jump into it? And I'll talk a little bit about the Fair Trade USA Fish and Seafood Program. Now, in general, and many of you might know, Fair Trade USA is sourcing globally or helping buyers to source sustainable products globally. So all over the world, we are supporting 1.6 million fair trade farmers, fishermen, and workers in 70 countries. Very obviously, not all of those countries are fishery countries. There might be countries that are landlocked and are a little bit more coffee focused, for example. 1,400 brands, might be a little bit more by now, are joining the fair trade movement. And since its inception, or since we are tracking fair trade premiums going back to communities, 830 million, I believe by now it's even closer to $1 billion US dollars have been shared back to those local communities into projects. In general, the fair trade label is very, very well known, and 78% of customers, specifically in the US, trust the fair trade label and what it stands for. The fair trade label in the top right corner of your screen. Many of you might have seen it, mostly associated with coffee, cocoa, bananas, groceries, but also seafood. Besides seafood, we are also doing household wares, apparel. So we are very, very broadly set up. Now, seafood was added to the mix of the things we do, specifically starting with capture fisheries in 2014. Since 2014, and the number is steadily growing, we've been supporting 11,000 fair trade seafood farmers, fishermen, and workers in 8 countries. Again, because not all of those 70 countries have sea access or fisheries that are supplying globally. 3 million of premiums have gone back to those communities in those countries. And the specificity of our seafood capture fishery standard is that 30% of those premiums need to go into environmental projects. Those environmental projects could be very obvious things like planting mangrove, restoring the coral reef, but it can also contribute to improving fishing practices, purchasing new and more environmentally friendly fishing gear. Could also extend into, public toilets on the beach, so people go where they're supposed to go, and don't litter the beach with little landmines. Specifically, sorry about the picture. Specifically for seafood, 65% of customers recognize the label in the seafood context, and that's a very, very high recognition in the USA. Third only to non-GMO and USDA organic. Very, very high label recognition. And Athena already mentioned how important that is for customers, but also for our brands, ASC or Fairtrade, to sell our story essentially. Now, more specifically for capture fisheries, I'll go mostly into capture fisheries with my presentation, because Athena already has covered aquaculture quite well. Now, specifically for seafood and capture fisheries, our certification covers small and medium scale fleets. And we have defined it by trip length, essentially. For vessels that are out at sea and you cannot be reached for more than 1 month, it's very, very difficult really to confirm that there's no issues with human rights, no issues with forced labor and so forth. That's just a limitation of the process we are taking, an audit-based approach where you have auditors, independent auditors going on sites and interviewing fishers, workers, and inspecting vessels. So we are restricted to 1 month trips, not necessary to the vessel size. You could have a huge vessel going on a 1-week trip, that's fine with us. Also, what's included in all our standards is landing sites and processing facilities. So not just what's happening on vessels, but we're also looking what's happening when the product is landed, how the workers are treated at landing sites, as well as workers in processing, like a picture here on the left, which happens to be from aquaculture, that's shrimp. Again, we do wild caught and aquaculture. And our certification really depends on compliance with our standard, and that's verified during annual audits. Also, we have a requirement for product traceability from harvest to the consumer. And that's very similar to ASC, or exactly the same, essentially, to MSC. A lot of processors are using the MSC chain of custody, which is the gold standard essentially, and fair trade traceability is not much different from that, with one little difference or addition to it, that we're also tracking those fair trade premiums that are being paid by consumers, essentially, that those premiums are going back to the right communities and are not being lost along the way. So why fair trade exactly? What makes fair trade different from other certifications that are out there? Well, at the core of what we do, not just for seafood, for all our standards, is really social responsibility. So with our system, we contribute to improving prices for fishers and also wages for workers in factories. We contribute to safer working conditions. We have that's one of the core things in our standard. We improve access to services, health services, transportation, general access to services to the government. We have a very strong focus on eliminating forced labor and also, of course, protecting children. Part of the social responsibility, mentioned it before, are those community development funds funded by fair trade premiums. Also, we have, and many people might not know that, in seafood specifically, a very strong, actually, environmental responsibility section that looks into resource management, which is fisheries management, looking into that fish stocks are healthy, that fishers are not taking more out of the sea that can grow back. All that needs to be based on science, actually, and for science you need data. Those data then goes into stock assessments, maybe a little bit less strong stock assessments that other certifications might have, MSC, that are really focused on the environment, but still very, very comprehensive. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. We're also taking care of biodiversity and protect ecosystems. And we have a focus on proper waste management on vessels as well as on land. And again, I mentioned it before, 30% of those community development funds go back into environmental programs. Traceability, I also mentioned before. We need to make sure that product is caught legally. It doesn't help at all if it's a fair trade product and all the workers are treated very well, but at the end of the day, the fish is catched illegally because they are going in a neighboring country, or the licenses of the vessels are not there. And we need to make sure that the product is traceable throughout the supply chain. With fair trade, with our fair trade system, we are able to mitigate supply chain risks, specifically for forced labor and human rights and all those things that are becoming more and more important to customers. And again, we ensure that those community development funds really end up in the right hands, are not embezzled or used for things that really don't help the cause. For empowerment, one of the most, for fishers at least, for the empowerment, the most important thing for them to come to meetings where they discuss the current state of the fishery, where they discuss how to improve the situation. The most important thing for them in the initial phases of a fair trade program is really those premium funds. Those premium funds are not just cash out money, but those premium funds go into a community account, bank account, and the fishers themselves together decide what they want to use the money for. So it's not fair trade or a buyer in the US or the processing facility telling them, look, you have $10,000 sitting there, you need to use it for A. No, it's rather the way around. The fishers themselves decide, and the role of the certificate holder is only to say, look, maybe consider this might not be the best way to spend the money. Final decision is with the fishers or the workers. So just going into the more technical aspect, the previous couple of slides really cover what we do in our standard, which is empowerment. There's all the modules that we have in our standard: empowerment, fundamental rights at work, working agreements, rest periods need to be adhered to, then the resource management, transparency and traceability, and internal management. This is a very, very brief, extremely brief overview just of the modules. Now, anybody of you who's been dealing with either fair trade or ASC certification or any other certification in your workplace, be it for whatever, the quality of the ink in your printer, I don't know. You will know that the little people, for little people, little means, you know, down the supply chain, the common workers. It might be difficult because certification is complicated, really, really complicated. And oftentimes with Fairtrade, we start from scratch one, right? It's meant to be community-based. It's meant to, you know, be accessible to small-scale fishers, small-scale farmers, which might not have they might not have a bachelor in business administration. They might not even have junior high school, right? For many of them, if they're lucky, even it starts with primary school. It stops with primary school. So there are several challenges, not just for Fairtrade, but for many other standards as well, that need to be overcome working with communities, which is, for example, administrative-wise, they need to set up committees. So they have somebody, some decision-making. So how do you do that? How do you put people in charge? How do you set up bank accounts? In many cases, there needs to be a behavioral change. For example, many fishers, they don't perceive risk the way we would do, right? So on the beach, let's say you need a light at night. So wires that are sticking out are fine because you know nobody will ever touch it. But for us, it would be just a horror nightmare show. Also, environmental awareness, many of you might know, is not the same all over the world. So from our perspective, many things are not okay, whereas for local people, it's just perfectly fine. Even they feel they are already doing much better than their peers. The cultural challenges, there's just very often a much higher acceptance of working living conditions that would just not, you know, be appropriate in our eyes. For them, it is appropriate. Settling of conflict, for example, in many cases works differently that we are used to. The whole in Asia, many of you might be familiar with the whole losing face concept. So, and that trickles down in conflict resolution. It just works differently. There are technical hurdles. Many people, that's improving, fortunately, but like 5 years ago, it was still very uncommon that small-scale fishermen had smartphones, for example. And it's still not a given that even if they have smartphones, that they have cell phone coverage all the time. So if you do data collection or updating logbox and you rely on the internet, it's not necessary that everybody has access to it. There's also science, unfortunately, that gets in the way quite often, because for the fisheries management, you need to have data collection and you need to have statistics, and it's really, really complicated. And then there's the whole capacity challenge from a simple life. Look at the guy here on the left. He's quite happy with his simple life, but that needs to, you know, for Fairtrade certification and other certification, that simple life at one point, but for all of them, but for a group of people who look after the system, that simple life transitions into keeping the balls in the air. So I'm just taking out the example here for the resource management. There is light at the end of the tunnel for Fairtrade, at least. Our requirements, not just for resource management, but for all aspects, the requirements increase over time. So it's not required that fishers right away from the start have a perfect fisheries management plan. In the very beginning, they just need to know the species they are fishing, if they're interacting with any protected or threatened species, and that's it. And over time then, they develop their fisheries management plan. They collect more data on how much they're fishing, they collect data on the impacts they're having on the environment, and starting from there, they develop their own fisheries management plan. Starting with the main species they are harvesting and selling as Fairtrade, and then extending in all the other species they might be catching outside. A tuna fisher might also be catching some mahi. A shrimp fisher might also be catching some flounders, for example. And over time, they really cover all species comprehensively and try and reduce the impact they have on those species. But the problem, if you read down just, the data collection, for example, it's very, very sciencey. So data is collected on primary species, secondary species, sciencey, super sciencey. People without a resource management background, difficult. And if you go into the very fine details, you need essentially a fishery science background. So how exactly do you make that work? That's a challenge for Fairtrade USA. However, we are inclusive, right? As long as fishers can demonstrate that they're doing their best, and as long as they improve over time, they remain in certification. Again, it's not required that you jump the hurdle right away. It's like a kid going to school. You start slowly. You need to demonstrate that you understand the basic concept of the alphabet, and 1 + 1 is 2, and then over the time, you get to more difficult things. For Fairtrade, this is part of the empowerment process as well, where we, through certificate holders, provide trainings to communities, to fishermen as well as workers. And a new addition to our standard, as of became live last year, I believe, we have now what we call the internal management system. That's something we added to our standard because we saw all those challenges in the past, and people getting stuck at a certain stage where they were supposed to hand over responsibilities to fishermen, but it just really didn't happen because of the sciencey piece. Now, with our internal management, what we have in place now is a system that's being used across the supply chain, and so in factories, at landing sites, but also on fishing vessels, and for all kinds of aspects. It's not just the environment, it's not just working conditions, it's also how do you conduct meetings, for example. People are coming together, and together they identify risks. So they discuss what could go wrong in our standard. Maybe we were catching shark, and if we're catching shark, how bad would that be for the standard? Maybe an issue would be, oh, we don't trust our leadership. So then we encourage them, what do you do about those risks? How do you improve on the situation and make sure that those risks are minimized or avoided altogether? And then we're also encouraging them, fishers and workers, to continuously check on those internal risks. So there's a team, an internal team that continuously goes around and checks on those lists. For people of you who are working in the food industry, it's actually very, very similar to a food safety inspection, where you identify where are the critical points where something could go wrong. You train people into those where those critical points are, what to do. You document everything, and then you review a system on a regular basis. Very important to us is that it's not only just rolled out by the certificate holder or by the factory, but specifically for social things, for discrimination, health and safety, fair remuneration, that workers and fishers have a direct voice in this process, that they're heard and actively consulted. That's hardwired into our standard. There needs to be documentation, and that's been during those audits checked on. There needs to be a paper trail, or during interviews, fishers and workers need to confirm that they have been heard to improve the situation in that risk management process. And the ultimate goal is to transfer responsibility also to fisher groups. That's often been very, very difficult. Initially, it's always the certificate holder who takes care of all aspects. And it's been difficult to roll that down and then really have fishers and workers play a more active role. I believe in ASC, especially if you're working with smallholder farmers, you have similar challenges, also in other standards. And in many cases, anybody working in management at one point has the same challenge. So I'm looking forward to hear from you. These are guys actually from the very first Fairtrade group that's been certified in Indonesia in 2015. they're happy. I hope everybody here on the call so far is happy, and I'm looking forward for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sven. That was a great overview of Fair Trade Certified and the capture fishery standard. Thank you so much. I am going to share super briefly some of the resources that we have as part of fair trade campaigns on kind of what you can do to support fair trade seafood or sustainable seafood in general. I know there were a couple of questions in the chat, so we'll get to those if there's any more answer needed to those. And I still do want to leave time for questions, but just really quickly, do this. I just wanted to let you all know that we do have a seafood activist toolkit. So whether you're part of a fair trade campaign or not, we've got toolkits for community members as well as campus community members. So if you're a student, this link that I'm sending here is for communities. I'll send one in follow-up with the campus information, but you can review that. It's in Spanish as well. We've got a couple of versions, so I'll make sure that those are all in your inbox after this call. But the Seafood Activist Toolkit just kind of gives a really good overview, kind of similarly to what Athena and Sven did for us today, all kind of pared down. Information on the industry as a whole, problems with conventional fishing, some resources, and then different ways that fair trade drives impact for fishers and fishing communities. So I definitely recommend that you take a look at that activist toolkit. It also talks about how you can get in touch with your local community or campus dining services around increasing availability of fair trade seafood. So like Athena said in her presentation, or maybe right after it, if you don't see it, ask for it, right? So that's exactly what this Seafood Activist Toolkit is going to help you do, give you a really specific way for you to ask for fair trade seafood and make you feel confident whenever you go talk to, maybe it's your local grocer, maybe a health food store might be a really great place to start, a restaurant, campus dining, like I said, if you are a student, places that are already selling fair trade certified products in other areas. So maybe, you know, the local grocer is already selling fair trade coffee. Maybe this would be a great time for you to add fair trade seafood to the lineup. So you can set up meetings with management, create petitions, and connect with other community members to do those things and increase availability. So like I said, all of that information is in the toolkit there. And we also have like a retail outreach template, so it makes it really easy for you to kind of plug and play, reaching out to retailers to add fair trade seafood. And in follow-up, we'll make sure that you have the information to shop fair trade seafood as well and make it really easy for you to find those things online or in stores near you. But that's just a really quick overview of our seafood toolkit and some of the resources that we have that might help you advocate for fair trade fishers and fishing communities in your own community. And I would love to open the floor for questions, or if there was anything that needed to be added on to those questions that were in the chat, we can start there. And then if anybody else has another question, we'd love to hear from you.
I'll add very briefly to the question regarding plastic pollution. We have aspects in it in our standards, so fishers cannot throw waste overboard. Also, plastic and organic waste needs to be managed properly on land. And depending what the priorities are of the fishermen, they may spend a portion of the 30% that goes to the environment on beach cleanups, for example. It depends really where the priorities lie. In the Maldives, which is also very touristy, they have quite a significant plastic pollution program, but because they see the importance of tourism, for example, beach cleanups are much more of higher priority to them than they would be other way in other places. So it's not a hard requirement that they have to clean up. They just, for their own production, they are prohibited for contributing to plastic pollution and organic pollution as well. It's not good to throw away fish waste on the beach. So we're not encouraging that.
Any other questions from the audience? I have one if nobody else does. Okay, so specifically for Athena, you mentioned in your bio that you have a background in animal welfare, and you didn't touch on it too much in your presentation. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what those or what parts of the standards kind of look like in the animal welfare section for ASC.
Yes, that's actually a difficult question for me. We have, that's an area we're really growing in at the moment as well. And so we have a whole team that's dedicated specifically to examining animal welfare in the standards. And as mentioned, at the moment, the standards are each for different species. So I would probably could better answer that as it's sort of a program that's evolving in providing some examples. Obviously, in general, of course, we're looking at things like fish health. We have in all of our standards very strict limits on antibiotics, but in certain standards, so like our shrimp, for example, there are no antibiotics allowed. So there's a full ban on that. In other species, it's very, very limited compared to what you would, on average, I suppose, find in the industry, but there also are factors in place. Some people may be familiar with, myself, I know working in animal welfare, that, you know, when it comes down to like this animal is going to die because it's sick or we can save it, there are times when you would need to step in and provide it with medication. But there actually are also strict rules that if limits are exceeded, that product can no longer be sold with the ASC label, because we want to make sure that we're being true to what the standards are upholding. So those are important. And I think also in terms of animal welfare, there is a broader view of the general care that will go into farms. So monitoring the health of the surrounding environment, monitoring water quality, all of those types of things do go, you know, hand in hand with making sure the fish are being raised or the seafood is being raised in a clean environment with healthy water, that it's not impacting them nor the other animals that live in the area. And then I think the feed standard, as mentioned, also is an important new development. That's something that ASC just launched. So it is in a period where farms have a long time period. I think it's about a year and a half to kind of grow to meet that standard. But mills, again, feed mills can now be certified. So we're ensuring the food that the fish is eating is also sourced from responsible sources. And so I think that's a really important thing to note in terms of I just always like to reference that you are what you eat. So there are a lot of different things at play in terms of animal welfare when it comes to different species and harvesting techniques and things like that. So when I had mentioned using examples, for example, the Hawaiian Kampachi farm I had in a photo earlier in the presentation, they have really strict rules when they're harvesting around how they harvest the fish. In the fastest, most painless way possible. They actually have special technology that allows them to do this really effectively. And so there are a lot of farms who have these types of operations, and certainly within our standards, we have certain requirements, but we're growing those as well. So it's really interesting to see the different techniques that are out there, how people are making it when it comes to health from, you know, beginning of life to end of life. And then there also are, like, we work with a farm that farms trout in Idaho, and they're really interested in genetics. So their trout are non-GMO, but they breed them for certain environments and to be the healthiest trout possible. So for them, the journey really starts at the very beginning, making sure that those eggs are well cared for all the way until they get to be ready to harvest. So very dependent on the species. And I, you know, would be more than happy to connect you or provide answers to you or the group after getting more information from our animal welfare specialist as well. So please let me know if that's something you'd like to know a little bit more about, and I'd be happy to do that. Really good question.
Yeah, thanks so much. No, that was a great answer too. I appreciate it. There are a couple of questions in the chat. I'll start with this one at the top here, and then we can get to you, Jane, as well. I see your hand is up. We do only have a couple of minutes left, so we'll kind of move through these quickly. Lexi asks, can you give an example of what the advocacy for current big chain seafood providers look like? Are those conversations fluid, or is it more strategic to begin at the ground level for fair trade or ASC certifications?
Can you say the beginning part of that again? I think I understood, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah, can you give an example of what the advocacy for current big chain seafood providers looks like? Yes.
Yeah, if we're talking, well, I can speak on ASC's behalf, and anyone at Fair Trade, if you'd like to go first, you're welcome to. I'm assuming that providers means anyone who's producing, distributing, sourcing, selling seafood. And if that is the case with this question, I can say that approach is actually baked into ASC's mission. So we are driving towards greater environmental sustainability and social responsibility, but it's through market mechanisms. So like within our team in the United States, and we are a global organization. So our home base is in Europe, where we have an office in London, we have an office in the Netherlands, and we have colleagues all over the world. Just within our team here in the US, we have a outreach side. We also have a commercial side. And so what their responsibility is talking to big retailers like Costco, like Albertsons, to big distributors like Cisco or like Aramark was mentioned here. Really, we work all across the way. We work also with small companies, with restaurants, with small little mom and pop like fishmonger type shops versus like large, very regional multi-state distributors, to talk to them about their sourcing policies, to make sure they are understanding of what the ASC label, what ASC certified seafood can provide to them. And there are so many reasons, as I'm sure you know, for this to be the case. For us, we want to make the impact at the ground level, and we want also customers and shoppers and diners to feel good about what they're eating and be able to make a difference on that end. But it's also really important that we have this be accessible, and that I think companies are held accountable as well for making actual sustainability decisions. And we have mechanisms in our program that can let those companies know and provide, some assurance that they need as big businesses. So, for example, if a farm does not meet our standards, if they violate something, or we're working with them and they are unable to meet that standard, we will suspend or cancel certifications, and that's actually publicly published. And we will also let anybody sourcing from that farm know, so that those bigger companies can be aware, hey, this is happening and you're going to need to change your policies or change the direction you're going, or make a decision about what you want to be telling your customers and what you want to be serving your customers. So on ASC side, we are constantly out there talking to the big guys, talking to the little guys, and making sure that we can also just be a resource when it comes to educating their sales teams about aquaculture, about different types of seafood and things like that. So I think we can't go into this world without embracing that as well, because it's really important we all be educated and that we encourage companies who are in the business to do better and to be aware, and make informed choices. So at the end of the day, we hope that those then trickle down to all of us who can go shopping for seafood and feel confident.
Thank you so much. That was a great response.
Yeah, thank you, Athena. And we are at the end of time. So thank you all so much for joining. And we hope to see you at our next webinar next quarter.